Like other cities on the Northeast Rail Corridor, Boston's a transportation hub, but unlike New York or Philadelphia, it's a hub with a hole in the center. If you're coming from one direction, you can go as far as North Station. From another direction, you can go as far as South Station. But there's a new push to change that from two former Massachusetts governors from two different parties. With us tonight is one of the governors, a distinguished professor of political science at Northeastern University and a distinguished fellow at the Dukakis Center for Urban and Regional Policy. We'd like to welcome Michael Dukakis. Thank you very much for being with us, Governor.
Thanks for having me.
This is not a new idea, but some things have happened since this idea was first brought up. So what have you seen about the way this problem is addressed in other cities?
Two things have happened. One is that both North and South stations are becoming increasingly congested. I mean, more people want to take the train. I think most of us would say, well, that's a good thing. But the problem is that when the trains come into North and South Station, they don't go through them, they stop. Then you got to turn around and go back out again. And so you've got increasing train congestion at both stations. Now, some people say, well, that means we ought to spend $1.5 billion to expand South Station, and God knows how much more to expand North Station. That makes no sense to Bill Weld and me. Connect the two stations, and the congestion disappears. And so what we're going to try to convince the new governor is that that's what he ought to be focusing on. Shouldn't spend a nickel on station expansion, but ought to connect those two stations, which, by the way, Philadelphia did 30 years ago, and many, many cities now around the world are doing, actually by the dozens.
I imagine you've seen some of these cities. So what changed when they did that?
Philadelphia. I was a student at Swarthmore College, 9 miles outside of Philadelphia, way back in the 1950s. In those days, if you took the train from Swarthmore into Philadelphia, you stopped at Suburban Station. Then you had to drag your bag a half a mile to the Amtrak station. Same problem we had. Well, in the 80s, they finally decided to connect them. So now you take the Amtrak, as Kitty and I did at my 60th college reunion in June, to 33 Station. You take an escalator upstairs around the corner, you get on your suburban train, and you're on your way to Swarthmore. And the total number of tracks required for both public transit and commuter rail is 8. 8 tracks take care of everything. And we've got 12 or 13 at both of those stations. So, in fact, we'd have some tracks left over if we connected the two stations.
Yeah, we've gotten so used to living with the current arrangement in Boston that we say, well, we understand why people from the North Shore want to go to Boston. We understand why people from the South Shore want to go to Boston. But why pass through that center?
Because many want to go through. I mean, for example, suppose you live in Salem and you work at the Prudential. Today, you go to the North Station, you dismount, you get off, got to go downstairs, take the Orange Line, go to Prudential. In some cases, you have to make 2 changes, and a lot of people just won't do that. Because now, if we connect the 2 stations, not only do you eliminate the train congestion problem, but we'll take thousands of cars off the road every day. And, by the way, earn substantial additional passenger revenue, which can help to pay for the project.
Now, since you and Governor Weld came up with this idea, there have been some doubts about it from a couple of quarters here. Stephanie Pollock, the transportation secretary, and even at the Conservation Law Foundation, they're saying, well, you know, we still might need to expand South Station. They even say we definitely need to expand it anyhow.
Well, I know that, and I know Stephanie, and I like her, and she was the deputy director of the center that carries my name in Northeastern.
Your protege here, right?
But, you know, in this particular case, we're going to have to do some explaining because, in point of fact, as we've seen in Philadelphia and many, many other cities around the world, once you connect the 2 stations, then all that congestion disappears. You have through service, and there'll be a fraction of the tracks that we now have required. So the notion of spending money to expand the stations makes no sense at all.
One thing that does occur to me, and this seems to be maybe some interesting middle ground here, is that instead of expanding South Station itself, you might be able to expand the capacity in another place where maybe the land is not so expensive.
I'm not sure you're going to have to do that. I mean, you really, you know, a good trip to Philadelphia opens your eyes to what happens here. There are many other really important additional advantages to this. For example, we heard a lot about Woodette Circle during the debate over the Olympics. That's planned, if you expand South Station, as a so-called layover facility. Because, of course, if all the trains stop there, then they got to go someplace and you stick them over there, which requires, you remember, that very expensive cap on top of Woodelt if you were going to develop.
The mega
You
deck.
don't need a layover facility if you connect the two stations. That expense and that problem goes by the boards. So I'm at a loss to understand why you'd need any additional capacity. Now, that doesn't mean that North and South stations cannot become development hubs. And in point of fact, a project which I started way back in the 80s is finally getting close to fruition, where we'll build on the air rights above the tracks at South Station. But there's just no need for additional station capacity. You'll have a surplus of tracks there.
You're coming to a kind of a regional angle on this. Transportation has to be a way to deal with growth. How does this help with growth, whether it's economic growth, housing needs?
Well, if you focus on public transportation and you make these stations development hubs, which they are rapidly becoming, then you get the best of all possible worlds. Excellent public transportation, lots of people living and working around the stations, fewer and fewer people having to drive into town. And these days, as you know, our young people don't want to do that. They want to live in cities, and they want to stay in cities and want to enjoy cities. So there are all kinds of benefits to this kind of thing. More density, more activity, healthier and happier cities. The one challenge we have, and we're seeing it now here, certainly seeing it in San Francisco, is you get a very attractive city like Boston. Lots of young people want to live in it. Cost of housing starts going up. So one aspect of this is investing in affordable housing. And that's an important part of this.
Now, we're just getting over the Olympics hangover, and now we have the Green Line extension overrun. And so, what about doing this more economic? You're talking about building a tunnel here. People, that's a scary thing here. In this
Shouldn't be, because these tunnels are being built all over the world, Chris. And they have new tunneling technology. I mean, they've got these tunneling machines which are remarkable. You won't even know anything's happening underneath there. They go down, they go deep, and they just rip through. London's doing 20 miles of the so-called crosstown corridor. It's on its way to completion. They're doing a second one. Zurich is doing one. I mean, there are cities all over them. Barcelona just completed one. Madrid just completed one. And by the way, at a cost, a fraction of what the Big Dig involved. So it's not as if this is something new. In fact, we used this technology when I was governor to do the Red Line extension from Harvard Square to Alewife successfully, on budget, and I think in current terms that cost about $1.25 billion, which gives you some sense of the cost here. This is not an $8 billion project.
Well, the other challenge is I'm sure that at least a good part of this would have to come from the federal government. This is a tough sell down there.
Some portion of it will come because it's on the Northeast Corridor and it's part of this major effort to develop high-speed rail in the Northeast Corridor. So that's an advantage. But remember, $120 million in additional passenger revenue, $80 million in saved maintenance, because you won't need two maintenance facilities, one on the south side, one on the north side, and additional revenue that can be produced there ought to be enough to bond that project and pay for it. So in that sense, it's very attractive. You don't have many of these projects that produce the kind of revenue that can do that, and this can.
Well, no matter how much money you can get from Washington, you need people here who can minimize the overruns. We've had some bad experiences. We just have this Green Line extension overrun. I mean, what do you do about that?
It's all about people. I mean, I happen to have a guy named Frank Kevel who ran planning and construction at the T, did $3 billion worth of construction on time, on budget. The folks that were responsible for the harbor cleanup, which, by the way, started at the same estimated cost as the Big Dig. It was on time. It was under budget. And look at the harbor today. I mean, it's magnificent. So, it isn't rocket science, but you need excellent people. And Charlie Baker and his folks have got a major challenge ahead to put the T back in shape, to get a new CEO, to get people that know what they're doing. And if they do that, they can do this work.
Yeah. By the way, we also see this blip in the globe over the weekend, a draft Dukakis movement. What do you think?
If I were to suggest for 1 minute that I was interested, I'd be in the Norfolk County divorce courts. Kitty and I love each other, but we don't want to go through it. Look, I'm 81 years of age. I feel like $1 million, but I'm not running for the presidency. We're with Hillary, and we hope and expect that she's going to win.
I know you must be a very engaged observer of what's happening, and if you look what's happening now, you know, the Trump phenomenon. I mean, if you compare that with you were running at the, you know, at the end of the Reagan legacy in the 80s. I mean, how are we different now, you think?
I don't know that it's that different. I mean, we've always had candidates like Trump that show up from time to time. In most cases, they flame out. On the other hand, you've got a Republican Party these days with an interesting party base. Not the heaviest field in the world, in my opinion. So this guy, at least for the time being, seems to be ruling the roost. I don't think it's going to last, but you never know. And then, of course, he might decide to run as a third-party candidate, which would complicate things a little more. So it's going to be an interesting next year.